Hello and welcome to Byju's IAS. Let's get started and look into the first article. The first article says Finance Ministry drafts model tender to ease purchases. What is the context? We have the Finance Ministry which has drafted a model tender document for public procurement by all central government departments in a bid to standardize the language and clauses included and to avoid contractual disputes. In this particular backdrop, we have to understand what is the concept of public procurement. Let's try and understand what is this public procurement all about. We have the central government. We also have the respective state governments as well. Most of these governments would want to provide welfare schemes and programs, and they also require certain goods and services for their effective implementation of their daily activities. In order to make sure that they perform the welfare state, and in order to make sure that they perform their daily activities, what they require is the goods and services. These goods and services that which are procured from different agencies and entities for the daily functioning of their departments and their ministries is what is called as public procurement. So what is public procurement here? It is for the effective implementation of the government schemes and programs, and for the effective daily activities of the government requires goods and services that which is procured from the private agencies or from anywhere. That is what is called as public procurement. Whenever there is public procurement, what it initially analyzes is the assessment of that particular good or that particular service. Then it enters into a contract and finally makes the payment for which that entity is providing a good or a service. As public procurement accounts for a substantial portion of the taxpayers' money, governments are generally expected to carry out it efficiently with high standards of conduct in order to ensure high quality of service delivery and safeguard the public interest. So what we have is two important parameters that which is used as a general principle of public procurement. What are those general principles? One is the best value for the money. The second is the fairness, integrity and transparency through computation. What is the best value for money, which happens to be the prime principle under the public procurement? Let's say the government is procuring the good, or it is taking one of the services from the private agencies. What is the amount that the government is paying? What are the services or the goods provided by the private entity, or for that matter any other agencies, for which the government is getting optimum utilization of the good or the service? So this is nothing but the best return on the investment. This is basically not about lowest initial price, but when the government is paying the money, how effective is that particular product, what is the quality of that particular product, the quantity that is being delivered by that particular agency, and how effective and durable is that particular product or the service is best value for the money. When this particular good or the service is taken by the state government or by the central government, what it has to make sure is that there is a bidding process or competition for the public procurement. Let's say there are n number, or let's say 5 or 6 number of private agencies which are ready to deliver the same good or the service. In this particular case, the government will have to make sure that there is a bidding process that takes place and ultimately the public procurement happens. So what we require is fairness, integrity and transparency when it comes to getting the good or the service from the private agencies. Now let's look at the statistics with respect to the public procurement. When you look at the statistics at the global level, it accounts percent of the GDP globally, and when it comes to India, it currently says it is 30% of the GDP, but it wavers around 20 to 30%. So the amount of money that which is spent by the government on the public procurement in India is close by to 20 to 30%. So 20 to 30% of the GDP is used for purchase of goods or the services. Now there are major concerns when it comes to India. Why? Because public procurement in India is a complex process. Let's try and understand what are these various complexity issues. The system in India has become complex as the country does not have a comprehensive public procurement law. Do we have one at the central level? No. Do we have one at multiple state levels? No. So what is happening is there is no uniform setup or a law which prescribes how procurement has to be done from different agencies. as a result, there are multiple procedures, rules and regulations which are raised by different departments. Let's say for example, the defense ministry or the railway ministry or the telecom sector or the public works department, most of them have their own procurement manuals to administer the public procurement activities. Since there is no uniform law, since there is no comprehensive basis on which the law is put upon, that is why we have a major complex issue when it comes to public procurement in India. In addition, the system in India is aimed at achieving what is called as the socio-economic development objectives. What is this development objectives? Let's say for example, there is a particular good or a service that the government of India or a respective state governments want. It can be procured at a very less cost by a huge manufacturing company. The cost and the quantity and the quality will be much better as well. But what does the government of India or the respective state governments do? They usually approach the MSME sector. That is because so that these MSME sectors also evolve over a period of time. That is the whole idea of the welfare state. So it is not only looking at cost, it is not only looking at quantity, but it is also looking at empowering the MSME sector. So the governments in India also look at socio-economic development objectives. But when such a law is drafted, there are ambiguities within that particular law, which also gives discretion to the administrative bodies. And as a result, the procurement policy when it comes to India is again complex and abstract. And finally, because we also have the public procurement where multiple interests and stakeholders are also involved, which may also give rise to corruption in India as well. And as a result of all these issues, the public procurement in India is facing a lot of confusions, dilemmas and complex procedures when it comes to the public procurement. In the present scenario, the article currently goes on to say that there is mix of nomenclature when it comes to the tender and its processes. Why? Let's say for example, if we are speaking about a particular tender process, there are different nomenclatures that are used, different names. One interpreted according to American, next interpreted according to European standards, and we also have names which are in line with the Indian nomenclature as well. The process might be the same, the implementational design might be the same, but because of the nomenclatures used or the names used when it comes to tender and its process, it creates a lot of ambiguities and increase of the contract disputes. Let's take one of the examples. It is pointed out that tender is taken to mean tender document or the tender process. So for the one single word, we have multiple interpretations. So when it comes to law, there has to be less ambiguity is what we have to know. But here it is giving rise to new disputes because of the interpretation of the very same word. Similarly, participants in the tender are also called as tenders and they are also called as bidders as well. So there can be giving rise to multiple interpretations and disputes can also rise, says this article. Apart from that, there are fragmented procedures and rules, lack of transparency, widespread irregularities, and unavailability of sufficient procurement professionals as well. In order to overcome all these issues and dilemmas, we have the expenditure department, which has come up with a standard bidding document that which can be used for the procurement, and this has sought comments from different ministries, departments, so that all these important documents are referred by the ministries and departments, their feedback is taken, and ultimately all this is addressed in terms of the tender procurement or the public procurement in the near future is what this article all about. Now let's look into the next article. This article says ousting Trump. We recently discussed about the issue that which is surfacing in United States of America, where we have President Donald Trump who incited the supporters to attack the US Capitol. After this particular issue, there was huge uproar for the removal of US President Donald Trump. In this particular backdrop, there are two avenues or two processes as to how President Donald Trump can be removed from his position. One is what is called as the exercising 25th Amendment of the US Constitution. The other is what is called as the impeachment proceedings. Our focus today would be in reference to the 25th Amendment of the United States of America. The other part of impeachment will not be discussed. Why? Because we already have a video and the link for the same will also be provided in our description box. Our focus today would only be in reference to the 25th Amendment. What is this 25th Amendment? Basically, this is one of the efforts to resolve all the continuing issues revolving around the office of the President of United States of America. Let's say, for example, there is death, removal or resignation of the President of United States of America, or there is disability of the United States of America. So what is the course of action that has to be initiated is what is this 25th Amendment all about. There are three major sections in the 25th Amendment. In fact, there are four. For our practical discussion, it is three important sections. The first important section is section 1 of the 25th Amendment. What is it? In case of the removal of the president from office or of his death or resignation, the vice president shall become the president. This is plain and simple. So in case there is a resignation or death of the president of the United States of America, the vice president shall automatically become the president of United States of America. Then we have section 3. What is it all about? It says that the president can declare themselves unable to discharge the powers and duties of their office. Let's say, for example, we have the President of United States of America. There is an exigency or an emergency, or he is not able to conduct his activities because he has to go through a surgery. In that particular scenario, what does he do? He writes a particular written letter to whom? To the President pro tempore of the Senate and the Speaker of the House of the Representatives that he needs a temporary pause when it comes to his presidential activities. So once the President does this, the Vice President immediately becomes the President. So what happens? There is a temporary period for which the President is suspending his activities and the Vice President will be acting as the President. And after some time, the President can also take back the presidency at any time by sending the same letters to the President pro tempore of the Senate and the Speaker of the House of the Representatives. So this small temporary period for which he would not be acting as the President of United States of America is mentioned under section 3 of the 25th Amendment. But the most important of all is section 4 of the 25th Amendment. What is it? It is the only part of the 25th Amendment that has never been used till date. What exactly happens? Let's say, for example, there is a disabled condition when it comes to the United States of America. So what happens? The President is unable to determine his own decision making capacity. In this particular backdrop, we have the Vice President and the majority of the cabinet who declare that the President is unable to discharge the power and the duties of his office. So what do? The Vice President and the cabinet, they immediately write a letter to the President pro tempore of the Senate and the Speaker of the House of the Representatives. So the President is immediately stripped of his powers and the Vice President becomes the acting President. So this particular letter will have to be written by the Vice President along with his cabinet saying that the President has some disability, he is not able to effectively utilize the presidential powers, and as a result, when this is acknowledged and taken by the President pro tempore of the Senate and the Speaker of the House of the Representatives, the Vice President will immediately become what is called as the President. This is not all, but there is a small catch when it comes to its execution. What is it? As we initially discussed, we have the Vice President and the cabinet who have to give this particular recommendation to the President pro tempore of the Senate and the Speaker of the House. What if the President says that he is capable of administrating or executing the policies of United States of America? If he says so, then the Vice President and the cabinet will have to respond within 4 days. If they don't respond within 4 days, then we will have the President who will continue as the President of United States of America. If there is no such request made by the President, then it will be the Vice President who will be acting as the acting president. What if the vice president and the cabinet are able to reply within 4 days? In case they concur with the viewpoint of the president of United States of America, then the president will continue to be the president. If they say no, that the president does not have the capacity, then what we will have is that they have to redeclare that the president is unavailable, he does not have the capacity. This is when the Congress will have to convene within 2 days if they are not in session, and deliberate about this particular issue within 21 days. If they are able to deliberate on this particular issue within 21 days, then in that particular scenario, this will be taken up for voting. If they are not able to deliberate within 21 days, the President of United States of America will continue being the President of United States of America. If the Congress actually accepts this particular proposal, this also requires a 2/3 majority both in the House and the Senate, where the President has to be declared that he is incapacitative or he cannot administer the executive part of the United States of America. If that particular voting is passed by both the houses of the United States of America's Congress, in such a situation, what we will have is this particular president will be removed, and what we will have is the vice president acting as the acting president. So this is what is the 25th Amendment with respect to the removal proceedings of the United States of America's president. But with respect to the impeachment, we already have a video, so kindly look into that particular video. Now let's look into the next article. This article here is speaking about the threat posed by the avian influenza. We have the avian influenza, popularly also called as bird flu, which has been reported from Kerala, Rajasthan, Madhya Pradesh, Himachal Pradesh, Haryana, Gujarat and Uttar Pradesh in recent weeks in India. So the government of India has asked all the states to strengthen the biosecurity of poultry farms, disinfect the affected areas and properly dispose of dead birds and carcasses. So the Animal Husbandry Ministry has also requested all the state governments where such issues are occurring to provide all the timely information, submission of the samples for confirmation and further surveillance and intensification of surveillance plan. In this particular backdrop, we have to understand what is this avian influenza or bird flu. The entire analysis of this particular thing has been explained on 6th of January. So what is this bird flu? What are the symptoms? Will it impact the human beings? Has been explained on 6th of January. So kindly look into it. Our focus today would be in reference to the economic impact of the bird flu. When you look into the statistics, India's poultry sector, according to the Ministry of Agriculture and Farmer Welfare, is worth around 80,000 crore, of which the organized sector represents 80% and the rest is distributed among the unorganized sector, including backyard poultry keeping, which is crucial for income and the nutritional security. And when it comes to the exports, mainly focused on West Asia, neighboring countries and East Asia, it is valued at 532 crore in 2017 with emphasis on processed products such as egg powder, yolk powder, pharma ingredients as well as chicken products. Because we have huge number of people relying on the poultry sector, in case there is bird flu that hits that particular industry, there are large number of people who will suffer. So the major impact is that people who have their livelihood means that is generated from this particular sector will ultimately face a lot of economic losses because of it. Now the important question is, why does bird flu reoccur every now and then? That is because it is impossible for us to eradicate influenza viruses. Even if we are able to completely decimate them, kill them at the domestic level, it is prominently present as a vast reservoir when it comes to the aquatic birds as well. So the major issue when it comes to why they reoccur is because they are always present when it comes to the bird in the wildlife. And also remember, it is because of the local bird keeping conditions as well. Let's say for example, we have the poultry industry which is continuously developing. As we saw, the numbers speak about it, but when it comes to the photosanitary issues and the poor sanitary conditions, that is why this particular disease has been impacting all the birds in that particular area. In order to overcome this particular issue, we had one of the declarations called as the Delhi Declaration, which was conducted by one of the summits conducted by the World Health Organization. It went on to say that countries need to build what is called as the local strategies. So you cannot have a uniform idea, a comprehensive program, but instead countries and regional state governments will have to come up with their own local strategies to prevent this bird flu, says the Delhi Declaration. But what this particular summit forgot was laying emphasis or preserving the natural habitat. Whenever there is disturbance of the natural habitat, we will have the wild birds entering the regional areas, and that is when there is transmission of the virus. This particular idea of local strategies might be prevalent, but the problem is there was no emphasis laid on the natural habitat and its disturbance. In order to overcome all these issues, we have something called as the biosecurity measures. So what is this biosecurity measures? Bio here stands for life, security means protection. So biosecurity is the number of measures designed that are practiced to prevent the spread of this particular disease into a particular area. So a biosecurity planning is nothing but a proactive approach taken by the government to safeguard the health and productivity of all the flock and the poultry sector. It will thus reduce the risk of the introduction and spread of the disease agents. The three principles when it comes to biosecurity is what is called as segregation, cleaning materials, as well as disinfection. What is this segregation? Let's say for example, in a particular poultry area, there might be ones which are infected and there might be ones which are not infected. So the animals or the birds that are infected should be completely segregated, compartmentalized, and the ones which are segregated and which are hurt by this particular viruses will have to be immediately culled, or they have to be killed and disposed of as well. The next is about the cleaning materials. Let's say for example, we have to transmit the chicken or for example any of the birds like the duck from one place to another. So how do we carry? That is by use of the transport as well. So whenever there is a particular vehicle or an equipment which is transmitting or transferring this particular meat or this particular bird from one place to another, they have to be cleaned every now and then to remove the visible dirt as well. This will remove most of the virus that is contaminating such a material. And the third important factor is what is called as disinfection. Properly applied disinfection will also inactivate any virus that is present on all these materials that have already been cleaned as well. So the major factors of biosecurity include segregation, cleaning materials, and disinfection of that particular area. The government in the present scenario has also come out with some biosecurity measures as well. There has been a protocol and guideline that which has been laid by the central government, where it is asking all the people for active surveillance of bird areas to identify emerging outbreaks. So what we are doing here is surveillance of that particular area. And then there are people who are associated with the poultry sector. They have been asked to report any type of sickness in birds to the nearest veterinary center as well. The central government also wanted the veterinary staff to conduct inspections on a periodic basis, catch any signs of disease among birds and also other animals safely as well. But since we have the interaction of the wild birds with the poultry, what we are able to not stop is this particular bird flu, says this article. In order to overcome all these issues, we can also follow and implement the United Kingdom's advice which was given to their beekeepers. So what are these advices? Cleansing and disinfecting the clothing, footwear and vehicles of the people in that particular area, reduction of people's movement in the farm bird areas, eliminating or reducing direct contact between the wild birds as well as the ones which are bred in captive, particularly through feed and water storage as well. All this will have to be taken and these will have to be implemented in the near future when it comes to India as well, says this article. It is this that we have to understand in reference to this article. Now let's look into the next article. This article says the logistics of a massive vaccination drive. This has been explained on 28th of December 2020 as part of the dry run activity. So kindly look into this particular article discussion to understand what is this issue all about. Now let's look into the mains practice questions. Today we have an essay where you have to write the essay for 1000 to 1200 words. The first essay says need for transparency in public administration. The second essay says national identity and patriotism. So please write all the answers on the comment section, peer review, and also come up with some constructive criticism. So this is it for today. Thank you for watching. All the best.